Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I'm an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. It began so subtly that many viewers almost didn't notice it at first. The writers of The Bold and the Beautiful appear to be steering Will Spencer into a direction that feels completely unfamiliar, transforming a young man who has long been portrayed as kind-hearted into someone who suddenly seems unstable, unpredictable, and frightening. The shift has been so dramatic that it almost feels as though an entirely different character has stepped into Will's place. Even Ridge Forrester has become convinced that R.J. Forrester is in serious danger, and somehow, almost overnight, he has extended that fear to Electra Forrester as well. A cloud of suspicion now hangs over Will wherever he goes, leaving fans wondering how Bill Spencer and Katie Logan's compassionate son could suddenly be painted as the newest villain in Los Angeles. Instead of the dependable young man audiences have known for years, the story now asks viewers to believe that Electra should actually fear the man who once risked everything to protect her. That dramatic transformation feels even more jarring when looking back at Will's history. For years, he was never portrayed as someone ruled by anger or violence. In fact, the only memorable occasion when he ever threw a punch came during one of his most heroic moments, when Remy Price was stalking and terrorizing Electra. Faced with someone threatening the woman he cared about, Will struck Remy down without hesitation, not out of rage, but out of protection. It was a moment that highlighted his courage rather than any darker instincts. There was nothing reckless or malicious about it. It simply reinforced everything fans had believed about Will, a genuinely good young man willing to stand up for someone vulnerable when no one else would. Then, everything seemed to change at the bikini bar, where tensions unexpectedly exploded. The confrontation didn't begin with Will looking for trouble. Instead, RJ was the one stirring the pot, provoking him with constant insults while putting his hands on Electra in a way that only escalated the situation. Eventually, Will snapped and punched him, shocking viewers who had rarely seen him lose control before. Even then, the moment felt strangely out of character because Will had always been portrayed as calm, respectful, and thoughtful. At the same time, many fans couldn't help admitting there was another layer to the situation. RJ has become one of the most divisive characters on the canvas, and for plenty of viewers, his arrogant behavior has made him someone who almost seems to invite confrontation, even if that doesn't justify violence. The tension only intensified when RJ later crossed an even more obvious line by showing up uninvited at Will's own home. He wasn't welcome there, yet he refused repeated demands to leave the property. From any reasonable perspective, RJ was trespassing, deliberately inserting himself into a situation that was already emotionally charged. When Will finally lashed out again, however, his reaction went beyond a single punch, and that became the moment everyone focused on. Yes, he hit RJ more times than he should have, and that was difficult to defend, but it also couldn't erase the fact that RJ had deliberately ignored every opportunity to walk away. The entire confrontation existed because someone refused to respect another person's home and boundaries. Yet somehow, all of the blame immediately settled onto Will's shoulders. Ironically, the Forrester family has rarely been known for respecting boundaries themselves. Time and again, they have barged into places where they weren't invited, stormed into Logan homes, demanded answers, and acted as though they owned every room they entered. That behavior has practically become second nature to them over the years. Yet, when Will admitted that he had hit RJ again, Katie Logan immediately panicked, as though her son had become someone she barely recognized. Even Dollar Bill Spencer, a man whose own history is filled with aggression and questionable decisions, suddenly lectured Will about using his head instead of his fists. Coming from Bill, those words almost felt surreal. It was one of those moments that seemed completely disconnected from everything viewers have watched this family do over the years. As the storyline continues unfolding, it becomes increasingly obvious that the writers intend to push Will even deeper into what looks like a full-blown villain arc. Ridge has already begun spinning alarming theories, insisting that Elektra herself may now be in danger because of Will. The suggestion that Will might eventually turn his violence toward Elektra feels almost impossible to reconcile with everything audiences know about him. Nevertheless, the show appears determined to present him as someone spiraling into darkness. Even his physical appearance has quietly been transformed to reinforce that narrative. The once clean-cut, preppy young man now sports shaggy hair, rough facial scruff, and darker wardrobe choices that seem carefully designed to make him look rougher and more intimidating. It almost feels as though someone behind the scenes instructed the costume department to visually announce that Will has become trouble before the story even proves it. Yet that makeover carries less emotional impact because of one unavoidable reality. The man Will keeps fighting is R.J. Forrester. Rather than choosing a beloved character as Will's victim, the show has centered this conflict around one of the least popular recasts in recent memory. RJ has struggled to win over fans, and many viewers simply don't sympathize with him the way the story expects them to. That makes it far more difficult for audiences to fully embrace the idea that Will has suddenly become a monster. Instead, many are left questioning why so much outrage is directed at Will when the history of the bold and the beautiful is overflowing with characters who have committed acts far more violent and far more dangerous than throwing punches during heated confrontations. The show's own history makes this new storyline even harder to accept. Brooke Logan recently slapped Katie with tremendous force, yet that incident quickly faded into the background. Years earlier, Ridge literally threw Bill Spencer off a balcony, while Bill retaliated by arranging for Justin Barber to toss Ridge out of a helicopter. Those weren't ordinary family arguments. They were life-threatening acts of violence that could easily have ended in tragedy. Looking back even further, during Hunter Tylo's years as Taylor Hayes, Taylor actually shot Bill in the back after discovering he had slept with her daughter, Steffi Forrester. Despite the severity of that crime, Taylor ultimately endured relatively little lasting fallout. Against that backdrop, Will punching RJ seems almost insignificant by comparison. Then there is Thomas Forrester, whose history is filled with moments that dwarf anything Will has ever done. Thomas fought Liam Spencer on a rooftop while trying to keep Hope Logan from escaping, creating one of the show's most dangerous confrontations. He punched Rick Forrester. He punched his own father, Ridge. At one point, Thomas even attempted to burn Rick's house down, and later blew up Rick's car, actions that crossed the line into undeniable felonies. Those were calculated crimes with potentially devastating consequences. Yet somehow, Ridge now focuses entirely on Bill Spencer's son, while saying virtually nothing about the violent history within his own family. That selective outrage makes his accusations against Will feel less like genuine concern and more like deeply rooted bias. Even Elektra herself isn't exactly free from violent behavior. She now insists she dislikes violence while sharing Ridge's growing fears about Will, but viewers haven't forgotten what happened with Luna Nozawa. When Luna was pregnant with Will's baby, Elektra struck her so hard that she knocked the pregnant woman completely to the ground. Luna certainly wasn't innocent and had done terrible things herself, but the fact remains that Elektra physically assaulted a pregnant woman. Considering that history, it's difficult to imagine Will ever becoming the one who attacks a woman instead. Yet, strangely, that appears to be the direction the show wants audiences to fear. The irony is impossible to ignore, as the narrative increasingly paints Will as someone capable of crossing lines he has never crossed before. The emotional warning signs continue piling up. During a recent conversation with Bill, Will admitted that he was beginning to scare himself, confessing that he couldn't understand why he was behaving this way. Those words carried an unsettling weight, suggesting that even Will no longer recognizes the person staring back at him. Later, after Elektra left with RJ, viewers watched Will collapse to his knees in overwhelming despair, screaming Elektra's name with heartbreaking intensity. It wasn't simply sadness, it felt like emotional unraveling. The scene hinted that something much darker may be building beneath the surface, whether it is genuine psychological turmoil or simply another attempt to force this new character direction. The show seems determined to convince viewers that Will's anger is only beginning. Meanwhile, Ridge continues tightening his grip over Elektra's future. Rather than allowing her to make her own choices, he increasingly behaves as though he alone knows what is best for her. He tells her to block Will's phone number, erase him from her life, and walk away before something terrible happens. Eventually, Ridge even presents Elektra with an impossible ultimatum. She must choose between her family and Will, between the Forresters and the Spencers, as though love itself has suddenly become a battlefield, demanding loyalty above all else. The pressure placed upon Elektra begins to feel less like loving protection and more like outright bullying disguised as concern. Ridge's reasoning also creates enormous contradictions. If Will is automatically dangerous because he punched RJ, then by that same standard, Ridge himself should be considered dangerous for attacking Bill. Brooke should also be viewed as a threat after striking Katie. The logic simply doesn't hold together. Nevertheless, it seems inevitable that Ridge and RJ will continue feeding this narrative, amplifying every incident until Will appears completely unhinged in everyone's eyes. The possibility that Elektra could become a victim of imagined future domestic violence is already being floated, despite there being no history whatsoever of Will harming women. The entire storyline increasingly feels built on fear rather than facts. As these tensions continue escalating, another confrontation appears almost unavoidable. If Ridge succeeds in convincing Elektra to distance herself from Will, RJ may see an opportunity to make matters even worse. It's easy to imagine him deliberately taunting Will, mocking him over losing Elektra, knowing exactly which emotional wounds to reopen. If Will finally reaches his breaking point once again, another punch could easily follow. This time, however, the consequences would likely be much more severe. Ridge could encourage Elektra to call the police immediately, or RJ might intentionally provoke Will in a public place like the Bikini Bar, surrounded by witnesses, carefully orchestrating the perfect scenario to have Will arrested while portraying himself as Elektra's noble protector. There may still be people willing to stand beside Will when everyone else turns against him. One of those people could be Melissa Dillon, someone who genuinely cares about him and knows the compassionate young man beneath all the accusations. She may become the one person Will trusts enough to confide in as his entire world begins falling apart. If Dillon witnesses RJ barging into Will's home yet again, refusing to leave despite repeated warnings, she could become a crucial witness, capable of explaining what really happened. Should another confrontation occur, Dillon might even defend Will to the police, insisting that he was reacting to repeated trespassing rather than acting as some violent criminal. Her support could become one of the few lifelines keeping Will from being completely isolated. Some fans have wondered whether Ridge will eventually threaten legal action against Will, perhaps even using the situation to pressure or manipulate Bill Spencer. While that possibility certainly exists, it may ultimately be more dramatic than the show's current writing style typically delivers. Instead, the storyline may build towards something even more emotionally explosive. A misunderstanding could unfold in which Elektra appears to be in danger from Will, prompting RJ to violently attack Will in what he later claims was self-defense. Such a twist would perfectly fit the show's long history of mistaken assumptions, leading to devastating consequences. It would also allow the writers to push Will fully into the role of misunderstood villain, while giving RJ the appearance of heroism. The possibility becomes even more believable when remembering one of the show's earlier storylines. Brooke once stumbled upon Thomas and Hope having a private conversation behind Steffi's Malibu cliff house and completely misunderstood what she was seeing. Acting on impulse rather than facts, Brooke shoved Thomas over the edge of the cliff. Hope was horrified as Thomas plunged downward, and although he ultimately survived, the moment became one of the show's most unforgettable examples of mistaken judgment leading to catastrophe. Because The Bold and the Beautiful has never been shy about repeating old storylines, and because Will himself now lives in Malibu surrounded by dangerous cliffs, history could very well repeat itself in another tragic misunderstanding. There is even the possibility that Ridge could eventually bring Ivy Forrester back into the picture once Ashley Brewer returns from maternity leave. Ivy might become another voice defending Elektra while reinforcing the narrative that Will has transformed into some terrifying monster who must be stopped. Whether that happens or not, the central issue remains impossible to ignore. For years, Will Spencer was never portrayed as violent, unstable, or abusive. He was compassionate, loyal, and protective, earning viewers' affection through kindness rather than intimidation. Yet now, almost without warning, the story asks audiences to accept an entirely different version of him. Whether this shocking transformation ultimately leads to redemption, tragedy, or another dramatic twist, one thing has become unmistakably clear. The Will Spencer standing on today's screen no longer feels like the Will fans have known for years. And that dramatic shift may become one of the most controversial storylines The Bold and the Beautiful has delivered in a long time. The deeper this storyline unfolds, the more unsettling it becomes, because it doesn't simply ask viewers to watch Will Spencer make mistakes. It asks them to forget everything they have ever known about him. Every new episode seems determined to reinforce the idea that something inside Bill Spencer and Katie Logan's son has fundamentally changed. Rather than allowing his emotional outbursts to be seen as isolated moments born from heartbreak and relentless provocation, nearly every character around him is beginning to interpret them as proof that Will is becoming genuinely dangerous. That shift in perception may ultimately become more destructive than the punches themselves. Once people decide someone is a threat, every action they take is viewed through that darker lens, and Will now appears to be walking directly into that nightmare. Even his attempts to explain himself may soon fall on deaf ears, as fear slowly replaces trust. Ridge Forrester has positioned himself at the center of that growing campaign, and every conversation he has with Elektra pushes the narrative one step further. He no longer speaks as though he is simply concerned about his daughter-like family member. Instead, he speaks with absolute certainty, convinced that he already knows exactly how this story will end. In Ridge's mind, there is no room left for doubt, no possibility that Will is simply struggling emotionally after repeated confrontations and manipulation. He believes Elektra must distance herself immediately before something terrible happens, and he delivers those warnings with the confidence of someone who has already judged Will guilty. What makes the situation even more uncomfortable is the amount of pressure Elektra now finds herself under. Instead of being encouraged to think for herself, she is being pushed toward one conclusion, almost as though her own judgment no longer matters. For Elektra, the emotional burden becomes almost impossible to carry. On one side stands the man she has cared about, someone who has repeatedly protected her when she needed him most. On the other side stands her family, insisting that the same man is now becoming unstable and violent. Every conversation forces her deeper into an impossible emotional tug-of-war, leaving her questioning not only Will's behavior, but also her own instincts. The uncertainty begins eating away at her confidence, and viewers can almost feel the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She wants to believe in the young man she fell for, but the constant warnings surrounding her make that faith increasingly difficult to hold on to. Meanwhile, RJ appears to be emerging as one of the biggest beneficiaries of the chaos. Whether intentionally or not, Every confrontation seems to strengthen his position while weakening Will's. If the writers continue moving in this direction, it becomes easy to imagine RJ realizing exactly how much influence he now holds over the situation. He has already demonstrated a willingness to provoke Will, pushing emotional buttons until frustration boils over into violence. Knowing that everyone already expects the worst from Will, RJ may recognize that he barely has to do anything at all. A few carefully chosen words, a smug smile, or another unwanted intrusion into Will's personal space could be enough to trigger another explosive reaction. That possibility creates one of the story's greatest dangers. Imagine another crowded afternoon at the bikini bar, where friends, family, and strangers all happen to witness the next confrontation unfold. RJ approaches Will with complete confidence, throwing subtle insults, mocking his relationship with Elektra, and celebrating the fact that she has supposedly chosen the Forresters over the Spencers. Every word lands like another spark on dry tinder. Will struggles to maintain control, reminding himself of Bill's warning to think before acting. But the humiliation keeps mounting. Eventually, one final insult crosses the line, and in a single emotional moment, Will swings again, unknowingly giving everyone exactly the evidence they have been waiting to see. This time, however, there would be no debate about what happened. Witnesses would surround the confrontation from every angle, and the story spreading across Los Angeles would be simple and devastating. Will Spencer attacked R.J. Forrester once again. Very few people would bother asking what led to the punch, or how relentlessly R.J. may have provoked him beforehand. The only image anyone would remember is Will losing control in public. If Elektra, acting on Ridge's advice, immediately contacted the police, the consequences could become far more serious than anything Will has faced so far. In that moment, the narrative Ridge has been building would suddenly appear to validate itself, whether it reflected the full truth or not. As Will's world continues collapsing around him, Melissa Dillon may become one of the very few people willing to look beyond appearances. Unlike many others, Dillon understands who Will has always been, and she knows that the compassionate young man beneath the growing anger has not simply disappeared overnight. That understanding could make her an essential ally during the darkest chapter of his life. Instead of judging him from a distance, she may encourage him to confront the emotional pain driving these increasingly reckless decisions. Her compassion could provide the kind of support that everyone else seems unwilling to offer. At a time when nearly every door is closing, Dillon's friendship might become the only thing preventing Will from completely losing himself. Dillon's role could become even more important if RJ once again invades Will's personal space by showing up at his home uninvited. After already refusing to leave once before, another act of trespassing would reveal that RJ has learned nothing from their previous encounters. If Dillon happened to witness the incident herself, her testimony could completely change how authorities view the confrontation. Rather than seeing Will as an aggressor attacking an innocent victim, she could explain that RJ knowingly ignored repeated demands to leave private property. Her presence would finally provide an independent witness, capable of challenging the growing narrative that paints Will as nothing more than an uncontrollable menace. Still, even that may not be enough to stop the momentum of the storyline. Once a community embraces a particular version of events, reversing public opinion becomes incredibly difficult. Ridge's influence within the Forrester family carries enormous weight, and his certainty has a way of shaping everyone else's perspective. Katie's growing fear, Bill's disappointment, and Elektra's confusion all combine to create an emotional storm surrounding Will from every direction. He becomes increasingly isolated, watching the people he loves slowly pull away one by one. That loneliness could prove even more dangerous than his anger, Because isolation has a way of amplifying every insecurity and every emotional wound. The storyline may eventually build toward one enormous misunderstanding that changes everything. Picture a tense afternoon along Malibu's breathtaking coastline, where the crashing waves below hide the danger lurking among the towering cliffs. Electra and Will find themselves in another emotionally charged confrontation, desperately trying to repair what has been broken between them. From a distance, someone catches only a fragment of the scene. Raised voices, emotional gestures, perhaps even Electra pulling away as Will reaches toward her. Before anyone can understand what is truly happening, RJ charges into the situation, believing, or claiming to believe, that Electra is in immediate danger. What follows could become one of the most explosive moments the show has produced in years. Fueled by fear and adrenaline, RJ attacks Will with everything he has. The fight quickly spirals beyond control as two emotionally exhausted young men battle near the edge of the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. A single shove, one missed step, or one desperate attempt to break free could send someone tumbling toward disaster. It would immediately evoke memories of the day Brooke misjudged Thomas and shoved him over the cliff after completely misunderstanding what she had witnessed. The Bold and the Beautiful has always enjoyed revisiting familiar themes, and another cliffside tragedy would perfectly fit that tradition. Only this time, the consequences could permanently reshape the lives of everyone involved. If Will is seriously injured during such a confrontation, RJ could easily insist he acted purely in self-defense. Ridge would almost certainly support that version of events, convinced that RJ had saved Electra from an unstable young man. Yet the audience might know that the truth is far more complicated. Once again, assumptions, fear, and manipulation would have created a catastrophe that never needed to happen. Instead of stopping violence, everyone involved would have helped create even greater violence through panic and misplaced certainty. The emotional irony would be almost impossible to ignore. Another intriguing possibility still lingers on the horizon. Once Ashley Brewer returns from maternity leave, the show could reintroduce Ivy Forrester into the storyline. Her arrival might dramatically shift the balance, giving Electra another ally who wholeheartedly believes Ridge's warnings. Ivy could quickly become another voice, insisting that Will has changed beyond recognition, further reinforcing the image of him as someone dangerous. Whether she genuinely believes that or simply reacts to the rumors surrounding him, her presence would add even more emotional pressure to an already volatile situation. With each new ally joining Ridge's side, Will's chances of clearing his name would grow smaller. Perhaps the greatest tragedy in all of this is that none of it feels rooted in the character audiences have watched grow up. Will Spencer has always been written as thoughtful, respectful, and deeply loyal to the people he loves. His defining quality was never violence, it was compassion. He stood up for Electra when she needed protection, cared deeply about his family, and rarely allowed anger to control his decisions. Watching that version of Will suddenly disappear beneath a forced narrative of rage and instability leaves many longtime viewers struggling to recognize the character standing before them. It is not simply a dramatic twist, it feels like the replacement of one personality with another. As this controversial storyline continues unfolding, the biggest question remains unanswered. Is Will truly descending into darkness, or is he becoming the victim of a carefully constructed misunderstanding that spirals beyond anyone's control? The answer will determine not only his future with Electra, but also his place within both the Spencer and Forrester families. Until that truth is finally revealed, every confrontation, every accusation, and every emotional breakdown will continue building toward what promises to be one of the most explosive turning points in recent Bold and the Beautiful history. Whether fans embrace this transformation or reject it outright, one thing is undeniable. The battle over Will Spencer's identity has only just begun, and the most dramatic chapters may still be waiting just around the corner.